We are once again learning the Morenu Shmita. Unfortunately, we're back to Zoom for the moment, thanks to our good friend Omicron. I hope, maybe we see the back of that as soon as possible. We're learning for the Menucha of Sur Naim Dangur Sur Moses Matifiori. And we are starting Unit 8. Unit 8 goes back to Psukim. We like learning Psukim, so let's read some Psukim. It says the Psuk in Vaikra Per Kafei, Etzvir ketzircha lo tiktzor, din ben zerecha lo tivtzor, Shnat Shabbaton yihyeh la'aretz, V'ayta Shabbat ha'aretz lachem le'ochla, Lecha u'lavdecha ve'la'amatecha v'lisrecha u'toshavecha agarim imach ve'lemidecha ve'lecha asher ba'atzecha tiyeh kol tevota le'echol. And these last two Psukim mainly, V'ayta Shabbat ha'aretz lachem le'ochla, are the ones that are going to interest us very much. Now, le'ochla sounds like a positive thing, right? You should eat. On the other hand, it doesn't sound like a directive. In other words, it's not in a mitzvah sense, right? V'ayta Shabbat ha'aretz lachem le'ochla sounds a lot more like the how would you say, the purpose, right? Hashem creates fruit, and I don't know if is purpose the right word? How do you say that?
The telos, the teleology, the purpose. Right.
So the teleology refers more to the broader goal of Shmita, right? But what I mean to say is more like designation. You know what I mean? Designation for the fruit, right? The fruit is designated for eating. I think that's the right word, right? That's right. The fruit is designated for eating. Is it a mitzvah to eat it? Not clear in the pasuk. Now Chazal learned this in the Chazal drashot are negative ones, right? Le'ochla ma'achmana v'lo le'efsed, le'ochla v'lo lischora. So it says it's designated for eating and therefore not for selling, not for destruction, not for waste, right? But Chazal aren't referring here to a positive side of the achila. So let's go right into the famous Ramban. The famous Ramban says the following: Amra Torah b'perot shvit, v'ayta Shabbat ha'aretz lachem le'ochla, dorshu le'ochla v'lo lischora, v'nichpela zot ha'mitzvah b'omro yitbarach v'achlu evyonei amech. שלא אמר לאביוני עמך תעזוב אותם, כמו שאמר לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם בלקט ושכחה. אבל לשון אכילה מזכיר בהם הכתוב בכל מקום. Meaning, the pasuk in Shmot is actually more interesting than the pasuk in Vaikra. That's the truth. The pasuk in Shmot says, והשביעית תשמטנה ונטשתה, ואכלו אביוני עמך, the yitram tochal chayat hasadeh. That's what it says over there. So the Torah could have said, "Vashvit tishmetenu mitashta le'evyonei amcha ta'azov ota." In other words, if the point is the directive of leaving the fruit for whoever wants to come eat it, so the pasuk should have said, says the Ramban, "Vashvit tishmetenu mitashta," and then the poor have the option of eating them. Right, Levyonam Chatazov, for example. That's not what the Torah says. The Torah says Ve'achlu Evyonamcha as a positive, that they should eat. So it sounds here in the Ramban, if you only read the sentence, just that sentence seems to indicate that there is a positive good in eating. But if you read the first part and the last part, the sandwich, the beginning and the end of the Ramban says, the Ramban referring to a positive or a negative of, you know what I'm asking?
So it's not clear what the mitzvah says, whether it's to eat or to let other people eat.
Right. Now the Ramban, on the one hand, he focuses on allowing others. He says, sorry. The Ramban in the middle sentence sounds like it's insufficient to allow others, because had the issue been allowing others, it would have said, right? But it says no, positively, they will eat. On the other hand, the focus and emphasis at the beginning and the end on sounds like the issue isn't merely isn't eating, in the positive sense. It's avoiding using it for anything else. So you can read the pasuk in one of two ways. You can read the Ramban. It's saying, right, the Ramban one of two ways. You can say the Ramban is giving an example and saying, for example, if you do something else, you sell them. So if you've transgressed eating, which is supposed to be the designation. And then the issue is designation. In other words, the fruit is designated for eating. If you choose to do something different, you're over on the designation, but it's a negative mitzvah, right? Of not using it for what it's not for what it's intended for. But if you read the middle sentence, the Ramban sounds like you want something more positive than that. Now, this might, right? This is an important point because the question is, I'm not Baruch Hashem. Let's say Baruch Hashem, I'm not a poor person, right? Is there anything positive about eating perot shvit? If you read the middle sentence, it could sound like the answer is yes, right? It's a positive good to eat perot shvit. If you read the first and last sentence, as long as you avoid perot shvit, you're good. The issue is not to misuse the perot shvit. And then the question will be, of course, is there a mitzvah to eat perot shvit? Now, of course, the Ramban mentions this in the Hasagot in Shirchat Asin. So he says the Rambam forgot a bunch of mitzvot, so I'll just remind everyone for the mitzvot the Rambam forgot to mention. One of the mitzvot the Rambam forgot to mention is V'ata Shabbat Atzlechem Lochla. And then I ask, okay, what is the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah to eat the fruit, or is the mitzvah to avoid misusing the fruit? Father? That's the question.
It seems to be both from what Ramban is saying.
Right. I agree that, right, that's why but the question remains how positive, right? I agree that the Ramban indicates, right, the first and last sentence sounds like the issue is a negative one, right? Avoid misuse, but in the middle sentence he sounds a lot more like positive, and then it could definitely be
It says v'nichpala zot mitzvah.
Nachon. And then you're saying it's a dual aspect. Let's see what the poskim did with this Ramban. I'm skipping this part for the moment. Arit El-Ghazi is actually the biggest proponent of reading the Ramban in the most positive sense possible. He says very clear, it is a positive good. Yeah. Someone's having trouble joining. That's weird. Okay. The Marit El-Ghazi, we're going to see some other implications of the Marit El-Ghazi. Marit El-Ghazi is the one who says that I think most clearly and most clearly that the Ramban says there's a positive mitzvah. Now let's see the Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther gives two explanations of why does the Rambam not mention this mitzvah, right? Because Megillat Esther, his main thing is, why is it that the Ramban needs to remind us what the mitzvah the Rambam forgot? The Rambam doesn't forget. The Rambam, it's not in his style to forget. So it's out of character for the Rambam to forget anything. So let's try to work out, why does the Rambam forget the mitzvah the Ramban mentions? Megillat Esther gives two explanations, and there's a very important difference between them. Nireli, מה שלא מנעה הרב, ולפי שמה שדרשו חז"ל, לאוכלה ולא לסחורה, אין פירושו שהם מצווה באכילתם, רק לאוכלה מותר לכם, ולא לעשות בהם סחורה. ראיה שאין באכילתם מצווה, מה ששנים בפרק אחד משביעית, שביעית ניתנה לאכילה, שתייה ושיחה. Why שביעית ניתנה? Because as I said, it's a designation. In other words, it says, don't use the fruit for anything but eating. No mitzvah there. He's just telling you, what are you allowed to do with the fruit? Is it a mitzvah to do it? No. I'm just telling you that's the option. Can I do something else? No. You're not allowed to juggle with the apples. You have to eat them. Wait, I have to eat them? No. I mean that, right? I'm not saying you have to eat the apples. I'm just saying that if you pick the apples, if you want to use the apples, you have to use them for eating. right? But you're not to use them for juggling. But I don't mean to say, when I say you're not allowed to eat, right? You're not allowed to juggle apples, you have to eat them. I don't mean you have to eat the apples. I mean, if you want to use them, they have to be used for eating. That's the way the Rambam learns. The fact that he defends the Rambam in this way proves how he understood the Ramban, right? If the Rambam says you're not allowed, that the mitzvah is only a negative, don't misuse, so it's only a designation, there's no mitzvah there, so the Ramban must think that there's an actual positive mitzvah. So you see that? If the Megillat Esther says the Rambam is saying it's only a negative thing, don't misuse them, so the Ramban must be saying use them correct, right? There is a mitzvah to use them correct. Let's see the second half of the Megillat Esther. ומה שאמר עוד שהיא מצווה, ממה שאמר עושה בהם זכור עובר בעשה, אם כן אביליו הבא מכלל עשה שהוא עשה. שמצווה הקודמת בזו, פירוש זה המאמר בכל מקום ואיני צריך לחוף לו. I'm going to explain I read it a bit fast because it's hard to understand what he's saying. I'm going to just say. This second option, he says, the Rambam and the Ramban don't disagree about the fact that there is a negative mitzvah not to misuse, right? Meaning it's an issur, stems from a positive directive. The positive, this is the proper designation, doesn't tell us you have to eat, it just tells us the designation. And if doing otherwise, it'd be misuse. Now, having said that, the Rambam and the Ramban don't need to disagree. Then it's just a question of category. This happens a lot when we have arguments over wording, right? Sometimes we have an argument about a definition of something, and then we realize that the argument is just about whether we like and accept to use of that word for this. But we don't disagree about reality. We don't disagree about the world. We just disagree about whether this is the appropriate word as far as the way we think of words. But it's just a word question. It's not right? Sometimes arguments boil down to how we define something and not something objective in the world or anything like that. So why am I saying all this? Because according to the second option, it seems like the Rambam and the Ramban agree. They agree there's no mitzvah to actually actively eat the fruit. They agree that there's no they agree that you're not allowed to misuse the fruit, and they agree that the issur of misusing the fruit stems from the pasuk of le'ochla. What's the argument? Whether we count those kinds of mitzvot as one of the 613. If the Torah says there's a proper designation, Chazal say, oh, and then this implies an improper designation, is that a mitzvah? So the Ramban says yes, the Rambam says no, we don't count those. We don't count mitzvot that are only telling us what is allowed to do. Umimela, I learn, that's what we call a lava v'niklalase. Umimela, I learn what I'm not allowed to do. We only count mitzvot that are directives, and the Ramban says no, we also count those. Right? So it's a category question. It's not a mitzvah question. To sum up, the first option Megillat Esther says the Rambam only saw the mitzvah of le'ochla as a negative, avoid misuse. There's no positive. The fact that he says that shows that the Ramban thinks that there is a positive. There's a positive good in eating perot shvit, according to that option. According to the second option, there's no argument in the Rambam and the Ramban. They both agree that you're not allowed to misuse perot shvit, and they both agree that you learn that from le'ochla. Elamai. The question is, do we count those kinds of mitzvot? So that's a category question. Let's discuss this in the past, but I'm going back to it now. The Rambam writes over here, right? I love this Rambam. It's a very basic Rambam in my worldview. Just making sure. Yeah. All right. Very basic Rambam in my worldview of Shmita. We mentioned this many times, and now we want to see the actual source. The Rambam, you can look at the whole issue of perot shvit in one of two ways. You can say perot shvit is a matter of divine designation, right? Kadosh Baruch Hu owns these fruit, and he tells us what may be done with them and what may be not done with them, right? You see that in many aspects. Kedushat Shvi'it. Kedushat Shvi'it, often the term Kedushat Shvi'it implies that there's something transcendental, right? It's a transcendence. There's divine ownership and designation, and you have to follow suit. The Rambam over here says something totally different. When you waste perot shvi'it, what you're doing is you're stealing from everyone. It's not a matter of divine designation. It's a matter of ownership. If everyone owns it together, you do not have the right to waste any. This is what I gave the Kiddush example, right? You have a Kiddush in the community. Someone comes and drinks in Corona times, takes a chug, how do you say, out of a bottle of Coke, right? So that's not the seder. Now, if I take the bottle of Coke and I have cup after cup after cup, I might get sick for other reasons, but I haven't done anything wrong, chosh and mishpat, right? But if I come and have a swig of Coke out of the bottle, and then put it back down, so everyone says you stole from the community because the communal Coke, we all own it together. So who are you to come take it from this? So the Rambam, the same thing. The issue of perot shvi'it lochla is not a matter of divine designation. It's a matter of ownership. It's a matter of ownership. I own this fruit, and sorry about that. I own this fruit. We all own this fruit together. You don't have the right to waste it. The Tosfot Yantiv says this is very surprising. The Rambam is aware of the question is why Chazal learned the Ochla v'lo Efsed, because it's everyone's. The point isn't there's divine designation. It's not a kedusha inherent in the fruit. That's not the issue. The issue is you're stealing from everyone. The Tosfot Yantiv does not like this. Let's read of Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, who does. Why? Because Zalman Nechemia Goldberg was very big on chosh and mishpat. That was his big thing. I mean, he knew all of Torah, but chosh and mishpat, he was very big fan. So it seemed like he liked this Rambam. Takes him back to the Beit Din. נראה שהרמב"ם מפרש שזה שאסור להפסיד פירות שביעית משום שנאמר לאוכלה, לא באה התורה לאסור פירות שביעית, אלא מאחר שהתורה הפקירה פירות שביעית ואמרה, היה לכם לאוכלה לכל ישראל, לא הפקירה התורה לכל אחד, אלא שיקח לאכול. You have ownership, you have a very specific kind of ownership. You don't have the right to take it and do whatever you want. You can take it and eat. That's it. אין רשות לקחת שלא לשם אכילה, כגון להפסיד על הסחורה, שכל הלוקח לא לאכילה, גוזל את הרבים. Now, why am I saying all this? Because why did I raise this Rambam here? Because if you say that, then when you say le'ochla, all le'ochla does is define ownership, and this is an interesting point. How far do we go? This reminds us of the famous Reb Shimon Shkop. Reb Shimon Shkop, the most famous Reb Shimon Shkop, is the Reb Shimon Shkop in the beginning of Shiur Hey. The beginning of Reb Shimon Shkop in Shiur Hey poses the following question. Two people come to me to Beit Din, right? And one sues the other, and I say, all right, you didn't bring enough proof on Motzim Chavora Alav Raya, your potter, go home. Right? Now, what should a good Jew do? Or you say, wait, hold on. You're saying that you didn't receive enough proof, but you're not saying that I absolutely deserve the money in my bank account, right? I say, yeah, that's right. You didn't bring enough proof. All right. So if I'm a good Jew, now I have a suffix whether I'm stealing from the other guy, right? Because you just said you as a Dayan are not going to move the money around, right? But how does that help me? Hooray, I still have a suffix whether the money I have in my bank is really mine. Am I stealing from someone by having the money in the bank? How does it help me that you say, well, but in the case of suffix, I could make out and not give him the money. But it's fake doraisa. It's a fake doraisa, fake stealing. Shouldn't I have to pay? Yes.
No.
Why?
Once there's been a din, that's the din.
Exactly.
Now, the ruling is not a problem.
Exactly so. So the Shimon Shkop raises a few options and ends up with what Rav Baruch said. Exactly that. He says like this: the whole Choshen Mishpat, all we're doing, Choshen Mishpat, is defining what does the Torah want us to do with in cases with our money. What is the Torah? How does the Torah define what money do we deserve to keep? What money do we have to give others? Once I defined that this is the money you get to keep based on the rules of Choshen Mishpat, Mimele, it's no longer Sfek Gezil. It's a Sfek Mamon. You gave a decree based on Sfek Mamon, and then you act on that decree. And that decree defines whether there's a Safek Deraita. So there's no Safek Deraita anymore, because there's a decree. The decree is good enough. That's it. That is the actual, as Rav Baruch said. That's the decree. Mimele, I could just move. Now you could move on. Now we're done. Why am I saying all this? Because the way Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg learned the Rambam, this is a very, very deep point. He says like this: when the Torah says le'ochla, it's not telling us a mitzvah at all. So why do Chazal learn le'ochla v'lo le'efsed? Maybe it's a lava ba mikal aseh. That's not what the Torah is doing. The Torah is defining your ownership in the fruit. What you own in the fruit is that part of it that allows you to eat it. Zeh. You have no right to sell it. You have no right to waste it. You have none of those rights. So I say, how much do I own the fruit? You own the fruit to the extent where you can take it and eat it. For your family, sell it. Now, mimele, you can't waste it because you don't own that part. But then what you're doing is you're not transgressing le'ochla. Le'ochla is like, in the mashal, in the example I gave, it's like the motzei mechaver alav haraya, right? What it did was it defined whether this money should stay in my account or not. Once the money needs to stay in my account, is the other guy allowed to say, well, you're a besafik, so I'm going to steal from you, and then we're a besafik on the other end? Says Rav Baruch, no, of course not. The decree ended the matter. The matter's done. The money that's in your bank account really is yours. Not besafek anymore, but because that's the Torah decree. Right? Same thing here. There's no transgression, there's no mitzvah le'ochla, and there's no isur le'ochla either. All le'ochla did was defined how much ownership do I have in Perot Shvi'it. And then there are obvious ramifications. If I only own the right of eating it, mimele, wasting it is stealing. But I don't need a special pasuk to tell me that wasting other people's things, that transgressing the societal agreement is stealing. Of course, transgressing the societal agreement is stealing. It's not a question. If I go to the Kiddush and I start taking the whiskey bottles and throwing them in the garbage, right? Of course I'm stealing. It's not a question. I am allowed to go and drink as much as I want. I'm not very wise, but Choshen Mishpat wise, I'm allowed, right? It doesn't matter because we have a definition of what we define. Where is the pasuk that tells me what you're allowed to do at a Kiddush, what you're not? The answer is there's an agreement. It's a monetary agreement where we know what you're allowed to do and what you're not. I put the whiskey there for people to enjoy. I didn't put the whiskey there for people to throw out. I don't need a pasuk for that. Now, maybe I need in the case of Shmita, I need a pasuk to tell me what the designation is. To tell me you only have right to eat. All right, so that defines my ownership. There's no mitzvah beyond that. The mitzvah is just have a definition of the ownership. You may have to act accordingly. And according to Rav Zalman Nechemia, if I take Shmita fruit and I waste it, right, or I sell it, I waste it. What Isur did I do? You guys say? Right.
Gezel.
Gezel, not exam. That's it. I don't need, all Achla did was told me what my Choshen Mishpat definition is. So what's the Isur? It's not even a lava b'mikal aseh. Lava b'mikal aseh means the Torah says a positive designation, and then I say so there's an Isur to transgress the designation. The Rebbe Chaim Goldberger says it's even less than that. It isn't even a matter of transgressing the designation. It's a matter of this is what you own, and beyond that you don't own. So you're not allowed to do something different because you don't own it. It's not yours. So that's the idea of Zalman Chaim Goldberg. Now, going back, just important to point out, the Ramban, we said that the Maharit al-Ghazi says that according to the Ramban, just to backtrack for a moment. The Ramban says, Rambam forgot to mention lo chla v'lo le'efsed, lo chla v'lo le'schora. The question is, does he mean that as a positive thing or not? So Megillat Esther says, so Maharit al-Ghazi says, Chad Mashmei, Maharit al-Ghazi is very clear, he says it's a mitzvah. The Ramban holds a mitzvah to eat Shvi. Megillat Esther, we said there were one of two options. One option is to say that the Rambam and the Ramban are disagreeing whether there's a mitzvah to eat Shvi. The other option is that the Rambam is only looking at that they both agree that the Isur is only to not transgress the designation. And the question is, does the Rambam count the Isur of transgressing designations, right? Lav haba miklal aseh. Does the Rambam count those as a mitzvah or not? The Rav Zalman Chaim Goldberg takes it another step and says, when you transgress it, you're not even transgressing this Isur. You're transgressing Gezer. You're stealing. What?
I wasn't clear about the Megillat Esther about the lav haba miklal aseh.
What about it?
I thought it would only apply when there's an aseh, and also the Ramban said that it's a shechachat asin. But if I understood correctly, he says no. It's just that it's lav haba miklal aseh, so you don't get malkot on it.
It's not just a matter of not getting malkot. The more important thing in this context, again, I think the malkot are more important, right? For the person who's going to get the malkot, it's definitely more important. But in this context, what the specifically the Rambam and the Ramban are arguing what mitzvot are counted within the 613.
Yeah.
The Rambam categorically does not count lav haba miklal aseh. Megillat Esther says the argument here is just a matter of categorically do you count them or not, and then it's not even a matter of defining. They both agree that that le'ochla is a designation. They both agree that if you transgress le'ochla, what you're doing is you're transgressing the designation. That's a lav haba miklal aseh. They both agree about everything I said. Now they disagree whether that should be counted within the 613 or not. Okay. And that's a category question. It's not a Shmita question, right? Shmita just happens to be one of the ramifications of the category question. It's not right. This is very, very different from Zalman Nechemia, right? If Zalman Nechemia says the Rambam disagrees whether le'ochla even teaches me any isur. All le'ochla is telling me is how much I own it. Mimele, if I go beyond what I own, I'm stealing. You don't need another pasuk to say stealing. We have that already. And that's the argument. The argument is whether this is the Ramban seems to say that there's inherent kedusha. There's something in the designation for Shmita which is special. The Rambam says nothing special here. The Torah just defined what my rights are, and if I go beyond my rights, I'm stealing from others. There's no limud here, right? Beseder. By the way, right, just to sum up the previous so again, I'll sum up again because we got caught up a bit. The Ramban focuses both on le'ochla v'lo le'schora, but also says that ve'achlu v'namcha is a positive ve'achlu. So the Maharit al-Ghazi says the Ramban means a positive mitzvah. The one option Megillat Esther says the Ramban means a positive mitzvah. What does the Rambam say? One option Megillat Esther says the Rambam agrees that it's lav haba miklal aseh, he doesn't count those, and then that's the whole disagreement. By the way, that implies the Ramban also thinks it's only lav haba miklal aseh. The issue is lo chla v'lo le'schora, really. Lo chla v'lo le'efsed. So either of those. Zalman Chaim Goldberg says more. He says beyond that, I'm sorry, the other option is the Rambam. Right. The Zalman Chaim Goldberg says beyond that, it might be the Rambam is learning nothing from the pasuk except for the designation, and then you transgress that. You transgress the isur to steal. Now, Chazon Ish and Rabbi Weiss disagree with the previous. Sorry, and say no. The truth is, there's no mitzvah at all. Also, the Ramban doesn't mean there's a mitzvah. In chiyuv leolam le'echol pirot shvit she'enan kishlamim she'eh mitzvah b'achilatam. This isn't like a mitzvah of eating kochim. Also, the Ramban doesn't think so. But the Ramban, isur schora minyan asin, aval ein aseh b'achilatam. ואילו צריך ראיות שיש מצווה באכילתם, לא היה מספיק מה שמצינו איסור סחורה, סחורה אינה מבטלת את אכילתן, שהרי לכך יאכלם. Why is the Ramban focused so much on Isur Schora? What's going to happen? Let's say I take apples. I pick Shmita apples, and then I sell them. All right, so that wasn't beseder. What's going to happen to apples now? I take Shmita apples, I sell them to Yonatan. What's Yonatan going to do with the apples now? He'll eat them. So how is that even a bitul of the aseh? Right? So the issue is Isur Schora. He says also the Ramban needs to agree that the issue at hand is not a mitzvah to eat, ela the Isur of selling. That's why the Ramban at the beginning and at the end focuses on and emphasizes that. Let's hear B'Shir Weiss, בכוונת הרמב"ן נחלקו באחרונים כמבוא, באמת נראה מלשון הרמב"ן כהבנת החזון איש, בכל ה-17 מצוות עשה שמנה הרמב"ן, כנגד שעת הרמב"ן, פתח הרמב"ן בלשון שנצטווינו, מלבד במצווה ג' ובלבד פתח בלשון שאמרה תורה. What's the difference in שנצטווינו and שאמרה תורה? שנצטווינו is a directive, right? This is what you should do. The Ramban says Shamra Torah, it's saying the Torah designated. So we see from that wording, he said, שלא כתב שנצטווינו שאין כאן ציווי חיובי, אלא איסור. It's not a directive, it's a definition. ממילא there's an isur. Right, it's not something to do. Because this is the only time the Ramban in all of mitzvot said that the Ramban did not write that the Torah said you should do. Shenitztavinu, that there is a directive. So it means there's no directive. So Rabbi Shavais and Chazon Ish say that the Ramban doesn't even mean it himself. I want to skip. I was looking before and I said, you know what? I think it'll be useful to skip to here. So I don't know if you guys are only looking on my screen or not. If you're looking at my screen, if you're not, it's on page 6. One more. This is the famous one, the one that you all know already, but we have to actually read it inside. So the Gemara in Yoma, the Gemara at the end of Masat Yoma is talking about, generally speaking, about tshuva and right tshuva and cleansing our sins, etc. And the Gemara brings a parable, brings an example, brings שתי נשים לקו בבית דין. אחת קלקלה, right, slept around, ואחת אכלה פגי שביעית. And they're both about to be flogged. אמרה להן אותה שאכלה פגי שביעית, right, the two are going to get flogged, one for sleeping around and one for eating fruit, the Shmita fruit, not in the right way. So there? I think there's a very big difference between those, right? אמרה להן אותה שאכלה פגי שביעית, בבקשה מכם, הודיעו על מה היא לוקה. שלא אמרו על מה שלא זו לוקה, זו לוקה. Because people will say, oh yeah, it's all those women got flogged today, right? The one who slept around them, the one who ate pagei shvit. People, right, on the tabloid level, people will think that I'm just as bad as the other one. I'm really not, even for both being flogged. הביאו פגי שביעית ותלו בצווארה, והם מכריזים לפניו ואומרים על עסקי שביעית תלוקה. Because people realize Shmita, as I mentioned many times, Shmita is harder to keep. Shmita, we have more of an understanding. Again, what's Asur is Asur, but we don't quite frown on it. We don't frown on it quite as seriously as we do about other things like sleeping around. Now, so this is an interesting mashal, and whatever the Gemara does with it there, it's interesting to look there what the Gemara is getting out of this. But the strangest thing here is that the fact that she's going to be flogged for eating the Shemitah fruit in the wrong way. What? Malkot? Really? All right. So Rashi writes, Shabbat ha'aretz lechem le'ochla, v'ayta Shabbat lechem le'ochla, le'ochla v'lo le'efsed. Okay, it's but again, lo le'efsed it's not Malkot. So the Rashbat says, הרמב"ן הוסיף מצווה אחרת בזה, והיא האכילה לפירות שביעית, מאומרו והייתה שבת אצלכם לאוכלה, מצאתי אני סעד לזה במה שאמר ביומא, למשל שתי נשים שלוקות בית דין, ועברה מה שכתוב לאוכלה, ואין זו אכילה. So he wants to say, we see that this proves that the Ramban is right, that this mitzvah is taken very seriously. It's a real mitzvah. It's not only designation, it's a mitzvah. Because if it's only a matter of designation, why in the world do you get flogged for transgressing the designation? It must be beyond that. It must be an actual mitzvah. Otherwise, why are you getting flogged? That's the Zohar Kia's proof for the Ramban. Now, the Rivash says, look, also the Ramban has to admit that it's Drabanan. But what we really want is the Grip Perla. Grip Perla, I think I've mentioned what he says, but I think this is the right context to raise it again. אינו לאו הבא מכלל עשה או עשה בפני עצמו, אלא קאי עליו דלא תקצור ולא תבצור. כלומר, לא אמרתי לך לא תקצור ולא תבצור, לסחורה ולשאר דברים, אבל לאוכלה מותר, לאוכלה דשאר רחמנא לקצור ולבצור מן המופקר, ולא לשאר דברים. בכל שעשה בהם דבר שאינו בכלל אכילה, עבר למפרע בלאו דלא לקצור, דלא תקצור. מעתה לפי זה ניחא שפיר ברייתא דיומא. שפיר כמלכות על אכילת פגי שביעית, משום לאו דלא תבצור. כיוון לפגין שאינן ראויים לא קרין בו לאוכלה, אבל בוודאי כל אחד יהיו גופי לא קצר ולא בצר לאי כמלכות על האכילה, בכל מקום איסור דאורייתא עביד בהכי, כיוון על ידי כך גורם שתהיה למפרע קצירה בצירה באיסור לאו. So, says the Grip Perla, what is the isur of leochla? What is the isur of leochla? This woman, when we say, listen, we're flogging you today. You say, okay, what have I done wrong? What's my isur? What is her isur?
Lo tiktzor.
Lo tiktzor, exactly. It says you picked that fruit. It says you're not allowed to pick fruit on Shmita. Yes, but you have to use it right. Used it wrong, you transgressed lo tiktzor. Until now, all we were saying was focusing on leochla. So leochla, is that a designation to the Choshen Mishpah definition? Is it right, as the Rizal Chaim Goldberg explained the Rambam? That's a Choshen Mishpah definition of how much I own, and then transgression is a transgression of gezer, right? We can say Tzalava Bamiklala said. One option Megillat Esther says, yeah, it's the Rambam agrees that there's an isur in leochla. It's just because it's a matter of definition. Bamiklala said. The Grip Perla gives us a very different option. He says the designation doesn't stand on its own. The Torah says you're not allowed to pick the fruit of Shmita, and then it says leochla. How can that be? Tshuva, you're allowed to pick it only for something specific, for the right use, for leochla. If you misuse that, then you've transgressed lo tiktzor. Now, by the way, what he says here at the end later on, we're going to see amazing ramifications of this. That if one person picks it and someone else throws it in the garbage, who did the isur? The person who picked it. The person who threw it in the garbage didn't pick it. But there's some kind of lifnei iver kind of thing, right? See what I'm saying? One person picks it and the other person steals it from him and sells it. All right, you're not allowed to steal. But the person who's over the isur is the person who picked it, not the person who sold it, right? You might say he didn't do any isur because he just picked it, right? But he says very gorem shetiyeh lemafrek tzira b'tzira b'isur lav. That's an astonishing statement. Again, you can say anus. I picked it to eat, and then someone took it from me. Mania said, "There's only so much I can do." Beseder in achinami, but such an astonishing statement from the Grip Perla. So I just want to sum up. The Ramban says that the Rambam forgot to mention the ochla. Within the ochla, he says that there's the ochla, the positive eating, but there's also he also emphasizes sandwiches on the two sides, that eating and not selling. The question is, what's the focus here? So Megillat Esther, we said there are two options. Mari Telgazi says no, there's mitzvah in there according to the Ramban. Zara Kia says mitzvah according to the Ramban. Mitzvah, and even so much so that you're going to lokeh, maybe midrabanan, for transgressing a mitzvah taseh, but definitely they all buy into the Ramban mitzvah. Megillat Esther's second option, it's a lava b'mikalas, and everyone agrees that it means that you're not allowed to transgress the designation. The question is, transgressing the designation, something we're going to counter now. It's very technical. The Chazon Ish and Rabbi Weiss, and a few others say that the Ramban never meant it as a positive mitzvah, only as a negative. The Rambam, we said three options in the Rambam. One option is the Rambam agrees it's a lav haba miklal aseh, meaning there's a designation. If you transgress that, you transgress le'ochla. We just don't count those. But he agrees there's a isur of le'ochla. Rav Zalman Goldberg and Gri Perla say no. The Rambam doesn't hold there's a transgression of le'ochla in that sense. Rav Zalman Goldberg says the isur is lo tigzol, and the Gri Perla says the isur is lo tiktzol, unless it's a designation.